Welcome to the I'm Book podcast. I'm April O'Leary, and this is the YouTube version of our podcast. To get the audio version, you can hop on over to Spotify or anywhere that you consume audio podcasts. We are going to jump into some really cool content, so stay tuned for our next guest. We look forward to connecting with you, and be sure to subscribe. And to start your author adventure, hop on over to o'learypublishing.com, where you can map out the entire process and see what writing a book would look like for you. Let's get started. Welcome back to the I'm Book podcast. I am April O'Leary, and I'm here today with one of our amazing authors, Kendra Petty, who wrote this book called I Can't Believe I'm Not Dead. And she is not dead. She is here alive today to talk to us about it. And her subtitle is Escaping Abuse, Occult, Attempted Murder, and Other Insanities, a story that cannot be true, but is. Welcome, Kendra.
Hey, April. Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Of course. I'm so excited to talk to you today. And Kendra just was in Naples recently to speak at our Book to Naples event. And honestly, so many people came to me afterwards saying how amazed they were with your story and your talk, and what you did just blew them away. So how was that for you the first time getting on stage talking about your personal life? I know you've done a ton of speaking.
Right. Yeah, I have done a lot of speaking, but not about myself. So it was interesting. You know, the lead up to it and the preparation. I really tried to put a lot of time into it and prepare. And you know, once I got up there, it really just flowed. Probably because I am used to speaking in public a lot, but there was a lot of trepidation about really talking about some very personal things in my life. It was the first time I had talked about some of those things to anyone. So it was tough, but it was very rewarding. I couldn't even get out of the room afterwards. A lot of people came up to me afterwards to talk about my story or talk about some things that they had been through and some of the things that they had done to heal. So it was really an incredible experience. I really appreciate the opportunity.
You were amazing, but to get to that point, you had to do a lot of work to get your book done. And you know, when we got connected through Jessica Jones, who was your ghostwriter / editor, you had already gone through years of a process to get those stories out of your head and onto paper. So let's backtrack to that very, very first moment. And I know you had reached out to a number of different editors at the time, but even prior to that, where were you in your life where you were like, you know what, I think I need to put all of this insanity into a book?
Right.
How did you come to conclude that?
That's kind of exactly what I said, almost verbatim. Although I just said, I actually didn't say a book. I said, I need to put it down in writing. But for years, people had told me, you need to write a book, you need to write a book. I've shared stories. My life has been, it's been just a cycle of trauma and tragedy, both in childhood, but also in adulthood, but also just bizarre, crazy events that would happen to me as well. And so I would tell stories, and my friends would say, you got to write a book, you got to write a book. I'd say, no, I don't have time. You know, who would read it? But a couple of times I did sit down to try, probably about 6 years ago, to try to write some things. I just couldn't. I didn't have the time, and I don't think had the capacity really to do that. It takes a special person to be able to write a whole book methodically. And about 5 years ago, I really hit a wall with all that cycle of trauma and tragedy and PTSD. And I said, enough. Like, I have got to figure out why my life continues to be on this trajectory. So I started reading and digging in and looking for ways to heal myself, heal my mind, my body, my soul, hoping that that would help change that path. And through that process of really figuring out how to heal myself, I decided I did need to write these things down, and that it would help me in the healing process. And so I set out to hire a ghostwriter because I knew I couldn't do it myself, at least not for it to be published if that was the path we were going to take. So I hired the ghostwriter, and originally I hired Jessica and said, I don't want to publish, but all this madness, I just need to get it in writing. I just need to get it down because so many unbelievable things have happened to me in my life. And as we moved along, and Jessica's a published author, she's got her own books. She's ghostwritten a number of books that have been published. She's worked with Simon and Schuster and Random House. So she really knows her stuff. And as we moved along through the 3.5-year process of working together, she really encouraged me to publish. And a couple of years into it, I finally said, okay, I'll consider it. And then as we wrapped the book up, I said, well, how do we get it published? And she really helped me put the package together and start submitting it to publishers. And she introduced me to you, and here we are.
And, it's funny because, well, I love Jessica, you and I both do. And I'm so glad that she was confident enough in what we do to hand over your work, because to me, it's not something that we take lightly. I mean, to take somebody's life story, the traumas and successes they've had, and to be entrusted with that, to bring it out to market is not like, helping someone buy a pair of shoes. This is a really delicate matter. And I know that when you started with Jessica, you had in mind that it would be much shorter of a process than it actually was. Yeah. So how was that, because I think that's not uncommon in a lot of things in life, right? Like, it's like Grant Cardone wrote his book 10X. It's like your goals aren't wrong. It's just, it's going to take 10 times longer, 10 times more money, 10 times more effort. Like, don't change the goal, just change your expectations. So I get that. But it is when you're digging into a lot of the stories that are painful and hard and trying to remember the details. Like, how was that for you to really sustain that level of engagement and energy over 3 years?
It was tough. It was tough. I'm very good at compartmentalizing. And so there were lots of evenings and weekends that we would, because I have I work full time. So there were lots of evenings and weekends that we would work on this, and that she would send me work to read and edit, or there were some stories that I just didn't want to talk about, so I wrote them myself. So there were plenty of Saturday afternoons where it was tough, where I'd have to just get up and walk away and take a break, and rereading and reading and editing and rereading and re-editing. It was a lot for 3.5 years, but it was also very cathartic, probably more so than I expected. And Jessica shared with me when we were finally done, she said, this is the hardest book I've ever had to write. She said it was the most emotional and the most difficult, but I have grown so much from it. And she's now a very good friend. I was just texting her this morning. And she no longer ghostwrites. So I think I ruined her. I think I broke her.
You broke her.
I did. Moved on. She now owns a multimedia company, and she's doing so many other things. So no more ghostwriting for her.
Yeah, she's an amazing creative talent for sure. And, like you said, the process of committing to Saturday afternoons and getting up and walking away and taking a breath and knowing when the ghostwriter is best at doing their job versus when you really needed to step back and write some things yourself. How did you feel your way through some of that? Because that's, when you're sharing things from the heart and things that are difficult, to delegate that to somebody else. And it's not that you're entirely doing it, because I know there's lots of interviews and conversations and things that happen throughout that process. But how did you determine that at some points, like, you needed to just do it?
Well, there were a couple of stories that we had put off. She knew sort of the context of the stories. They're early on in my childhood. She knew the context, and I just said, I'm not ready to talk about them yet. And as the years went on, she kept saying, we've got to get these stories down in writing because we've got to build them into the book. And I finally just sat down, and took me, a month and a half, maybe a couple months to just write them myself. And then I sent them to her, and I said, here are the stories, so that we don't have to talk about it, so that I don't have to talk about it. If you want to edit it, feel free, or, make it more, make it flow different, or more readable. But there was definitely push and pull from Jessica and I. She's a creative person, so she's much more emotional. I'm a business person. And one of the coping mechanisms that I've developed over the years from childhood on to deal with a lot of this is to compartmentalize. And, if something's very emotional, I have the ability to put it in a box and set it aside and say, I'll deal with you later. I've got to focus on work, or I've got to focus on my career, or whatever the case may be. And so she wanted more emotion and tried to pull that emotion out of me. And that was hard for me to share. That made me much more vulnerable. So,
yeah. Well, I think there's a time and place, of course, like you said, to compartmentalize and to put things to the side and say, I can't just, wear my heart out on the street every day, or I'll never get anything done. But then to sort of deliberately sort of take those boxes back and peek in there and say, well, what was in here that I put in here? Like, I can't remember. It's like the times when I've, gone through, like, maybe from a move, or, decluttering the house or whatever. And I heard a strategy one time, like, put anything that you're not quite sure you want to give away yet in a box and put it in your attic or somewhere, and then go back 12 months later. And if you haven't needed anything, don't even open the box, just get rid of them. So I always thought that was kind of a good strategy. But emotionally speaking, there can be times where we put stuff away and then it's decades later and we're like, I don't even know what was in that box, or I don't know if I want to open that box. So as she was kind of trying to pull you out, of some of those, the emotions out, did you find that was hard to identify the feelings that you had compartmentalized?
100%. And it actually, that was really one of probably our biggest tug of war is, as we were probably 3/4 through the book, she called me one day and said, these stories are incredible. They're amazing. This is going to make an incredible book. But I really, readers connect with emotions, and I really feel like there needs to be more emotions in this book. And so we're going to start an exercise where I'm going to set some appointments with you, and I'm going to call you, and I'm going to pick one of the stories, and we're going to talk about that story. And I want you to tell me how it feels, how you felt when you were going through it. So I said, okay, well, at first I said, that doesn't sound very comfortable. Can't you just put in your emotions? You're the writer. And she said, that's not how this works. And I said, well, I'm not sure if I really can share, but I'm willing, So we kind of went back and forth, and she was frustrated and I was frustrated. So we got off the phone, and I thought about it for a few days, and I called her back. I said, all right, listen, I really want this to be a great book that readers do connect with. And if you feel like there needs to be more emotion in the book, then okay, let's give it a try. And so, so we set an appointment, and we discovered that I really only had the vocabulary for a handful of emotions: happy, sad, angry, and hungry. Even though I know hungry is not an emotion. But, in looking back at that whole process, I realized that, we didn't talk growing up. I grew up in a religious cult, basically. And there were not conversations about anything you felt, because we were not allowed to feel anything other than just, focusing on God and the Bible and this religion that my mother and my stepfather had created. And so we weren't allowed to be angry. We weren't allowed to be sad. We weren't even allowed to be like very happy and gregarious. We just had to be very non-emotional, but my mom was extremely emotional. So she was emotional enough for everybody, but we also did not talk about that. And that carried over into my adult life. So I realized I just didn't have that I feel very deeply. I feel very, very deeply. I just didn't have the capability to talk about how I feel very well, other than say it made me happy, sad, or angry, or hungry.
So would you say that now, having gone through that process with Jessica and doing those exercises, that just in your daily life, you are more able to access emotions that maybe before you would have missed?
Yeah, and I've always felt those emotions. I just always kept them very contained. Everybody would always tell me you have such a good poker face. And so I think so. I'm not a crier. I'm just very even. I don't get really angry, but I also don't get overly excited. and I don't cry, I definitely feel those things, but I think I've become more empathetic to people when I see them, because I used to kind of shut down when I would see those emotions. When
Mhm.
somebody would get overly, angry, and I still can shut down if somebody's angry, but somebody's crying, I have a hard time really, or used to have a hard time really understanding that or dealing with that. But I think I've become more empathetic to the feelings of people, instead of just
Do you
crying.
think do you think maybe this is, and then we'll get into the content of your book a little bit. I know I'm going to a little bit down the psychology trail, but I just find it fascinating how people their life experiences up to the point when you meet them really do define a lot about a person, and how they went through life, like you said, in childhood, and what was and wasn't talked about, or what was and wasn't allowed, and how that made you into the person you are now, or how all those pieces fit together. Like, we're very complex beings, and to have put all of that experience and trauma and insanity into your book, and then to be able to kind of go back and have those feelings around the things that maybe you didn't feel at the time. Did you find that you had more empathy for yourself?
That's a good question. I definitely felt a lot during those times, for sure, during all those. But I also was in so much of my life in survivor mode and just trying to survive. That that was my sole focus. Is I've got to live, I've got to survive, I've got to not die, I've got to, and that really kicks in an adrenaline level that you're just eye on the prize, really focused. But I definitely also felt very emotional through all those things. Um, I don't know if it created more empathy for myself or not. I don't know if I'm there quite yet. Um, that's still a work in progress.
Okay. All right. I'll accept that as an answer.
That was kind of the answer I gave Jessica a few years ago when she was trying to pull all that emotion out of me.
Yeah. Well, I won't arm wrestle with you over that one, but I definitely think, in reading through this book, um, which for those of you listening right now, again, it's called I Can't Believe I'm Not Dead by Kendra Petty. It really makes you see the struggles that seem insurmountable, and watching you go through so many things time, and like you said, time again, and how things kept coming, and it was I'm going to make this change, and then that won't happen again, and then you find yourself in another traumatic situation, and then, but yet, looking at you right now today, looking sharp and with a beautiful home and smart and successful career and, great relationships. I mean, when Kendra's had her book launch, we do a big book launch over Zoom on the day of the book launch, just because it's a great way to connect with people from your past and friends and family who might not be able to be in the location. I mean, Kendra's room was maxed out. I mean, and the amount of people that stayed on after our sort of interview went on to say how much they loved her, how proud they were, how, appreciative they were to be part of her life. It's like you would never know that the person who went through all of this could be here now, so what have you found, maybe from readers who have spoken to you about your book, maybe those who knew you before the book, maybe those who have only met you since the book, some of the stories? I mean, there's so many stories, so I don't want to pull out anyone in particular. I'm curious what you find is resonating with readers, where they say, oh my God, I couldn't believe this part of the story, or I didn't know that about you. Are there any peeks behind the curtain that we can give some of the listeners? I don't want to give away the whole story,
Sure.
of course.
Sure. I because I spend a lifetime of not really talking about things, most people didn't know many of the stories that are in there, and were quite shocked. Um, I and honestly, the feedback has been phenomenal. It's just been so heartwarming and so positive, and I've had people reach out to me from my childhood to tell me, I never knew, and I'm so sorry, I tell them, don't be sorry. Like, we all have our paths and we all went through what we went through. I'm alive and I'm thriving. I have an amazing life. But I think as you get into my adulthood, those things are a little more shocking for people. My marriage and working for a mafia style company that tried to kill me. That really is sort of the pinnacle, I think, of the book. And that was, spending over a decade trying to heal from that experience alone is what kind of catapulted me to say, enough is enough is enough. I've got to figure out a way to stop this trajectory so these things don't continue to happen in my life. But I would say probably that's the last few chapters of the book before I sort of round out in the book my path to healing in the last chapter. And I would say those last few chapters are pretty to people.
Yeah. Well, to whet the appetite of those who haven't read the book, when Kendra talks about what happened in her career and the insanity around I don't even know how to explain it. Like, I could see where you would be tongue-tied with Jessica, because it's almost like you can't even understand that this could actually happen in your professional life. It seems like we've talked about, this needs to be a Hollywood movie. It really does, because it's really like unbelievable. When you got to the point of healing, as you said, and that comes through towards the end of the book, and it's one of the things I love so much about the book is it's not, the book is from the very beginning, Kendra's connection with her brother Kent Jr., which she talks about with such love and admiration, and I love that we included his picture in the front of the book, and to witness what happened. And I don't necessarily want to give that away. We don't have to, but Kendra had some very early tragedies that happened and continued. Then to get to the point of healing, and at the end, so you've gone through time after time after time and decade after decade of just really immense suffering and things that are, couldn't have any one of these things if it happened to one person. But to get to the point of healing and how you came about that, like, what were some of the points in your life that pointed towards that? If you can give a tiny peek into that, we don't need to give the whole thing away either, but for me, that's the real power of the book, is not like, hey, all this shit happened to me and it was terrible. It's like, this stuff happened and this is absolutely like I read this and I'm like, my life has been like, nothing in comparison. So I have no reason to not forgive people, or to not live with gratitude, or to not have some sort of, health in my life. Right. Because in comparison, you've given me a path to say, like, no matter what you've been through, there is a way forward. But how did you come to that?
It took a lot of time. It took a lot of time. And I really looked at my life. I looked at the life I had built, which is an incredible life. But then behind the scenes, all this catastrophe constantly happening to me, but yet still maintaining my career and showing up every day and not sharing those things with people and just handling it. And it was, it was not just it wasn't just a lot of mental pain. It was a lot of physical pain too. The things that I went through were physically very painful for many years. And so really learning how to deal with the physical and the mental pain so that I could show up every day and focus on my career, which was so important to me, and build my career to make sure I could take care of myself, was really a process. But when I hit that wall 5 years ago and said, I want to live the rest of my life in peace, am I attracting all this trauma and tragedy? Is it something I'm doing? What is happening? And I really started spending time in Sedona, which is a very healing place. And there's a lot of energy workers, and started working on, energy work, to meditation, and I did so many things, and I talk about some of them in the last chapter of the book. I don't talk about everything, but I just realized that I have escaped death so many times, more times than what's in this book. That there's got to be a reason why I'm still here, and it's not just for me to continue in my career and continue what I'm doing every day. There has to be a reason why I'm still alive, and I just decided maybe it's I make sure I give time, I make sure I give money, I make sure I give back because I am so fortunate. But there's got to be more, and so I decided maybe I can help people through my stories, which is sort of how the book started to come to fruition. But in that process, and not just the book, but in focusing on so many other things to heal my mind, my body, my soul, my heart, I really started focusing on gratitude, forgiveness, opening myself back up. So shut down for so many years after my employer tried to murder me. I really just shut everybody out. I was scared all the time. I was constantly looking over my shoulder. Are they coming back for me? And so really opening myself back up to that. And that's been very hard. Gratitude is easy. I focus on gratitude every day. I'm so grateful for, I'm lucky to be alive. But focusing on forgiveness and forgiving all those that hurt me, there have been a lot, and forgiving myself for things, and also really letting my guards down and letting people in. But in finality, sort of wrapping all of this up, something I practiced my whole life, and I think is so important for anyone, is to never get stuck in blame, never get stuck in anger, never get stuck in self-pity and woe is me. Like, you just have to keep moving. And if you're in a bad situation, you have to change it. You have to make that change instead of sitting in self-pity and woe is me. And I think that's really how I've always sort of pulled through those situations, is to just move forward and figure out a way to get myself out of that situation and not find blame or sit in self-pity.
Yeah.
That was a long-winded answer. But,
no, it's beautiful. I mean, it's a really beautiful way to think about moving forward, because you're right. Like, to me, blame and anger, or it stops the flow of energy of the good coming, and it makes you feel powerless. Like, there's nothing I can do to make my life better, so I may as well just throw in the towel. I may just, all this bad stuff happened and it was nothing I could control. And so therefore, that's why I am, living this life that's subpar, for example. But to take the reins back and say, no, wait a second, like, it should happen that I didn't want to happen. It shouldn't have happened. It wasn't my fault that it happened. So it's not accepting blame for the things that happened, but it's saying, like you said, I can choose to move forward. I can choose to make my life good. I can choose to set better boundaries or get myself out of situations that aren't working. Or even, to me, for you to have that sort of moment of self-awareness to say, why does all this keep happening to me? Rather than, poor me, this is always happening to me. Right. It's like the curiosity of, like, why, and is there a reason? If there's any part that I'm contributing to this, I'm going to find out. And if there's anything that I don't know about, how to cut people out of my life, for example, that are causing chaos, or, there's skills. Those are certain life skills, I'd say, especially growing up. I grew up in a quite not as intensive a religious environment as you, but there was a certain level of that. And it feels like, well, if in our world, Jesus laid down his life for everybody, then why shouldn't you lay down your life for other people? Like, everybody's worthy of my, like, I sacrifice myself for everybody. And I think that's a really toxic mindset to have. Like, I think to untangle some of that and say, wait a second, no, first of all, like, that doesn't serve me. Maybe that's part of the problem, is some of the ways I was taught to think as a young child don't really work. Or it's inviting more craziness. So,
well, and you're molded as a child to, for me anyway, there was so much chaos and so much abuse growing up, and so much trauma. Like, it was just 911 every day for 18 years. That put my bar of tolerance for ridiculousness very high for my adulthood. And so when I moved into adulthood, if I found myself in a bad, dramatic, traumatic situation, my tolerance was much higher, and it took me longer to pull myself out of that for many years, decades, until till the last 5 or 6 years, when I said, okay, now the light bulb went off and said, I don't have to keep living like this. I've got to learn how to have a life of peace and happiness and joy and health, physical health.
Yeah. I love it. And I love that, we got the chance to work together and that we've become friends. And, I think there are no accidents. I do believe that there are people that you're bound to meet, and that, the job that we have as human beings is to connect people with one another who we, if we've ever had that feeling like this person needs to meet that person. And, I'm grateful that Jessica made that connection, because how would, you're in, the Southwest, on Pacific time. Jessica's in the way north, east in New York. And I'm in the farthest south, east in Florida. So it's like, how did this triangle get connected? I just think it's amazing. So, what's your hope for the future for the book, and for what it might do for others who read it, or what you hope it might do for you, personally, professionally? Any aspirations or things that you're?
I think for other people, just a continuation of what's already been happening the last few months, of people reaching out to me, and I've had different types of messages. There's really kind of 3 different types of messages that people have reached out to me with, like, wow, I can't believe all you went through, but I can relate to some of those things, and it's incredible to not feel alone. Also, people who said, I'm very grateful for all the nuggets of information you shared in your book of healing, and some of the ways you healed. I have now put those into play, and it's really helping me. And then thirdly, some people who have several people, probably 4 or 5 people, who've reached out to me and said, wow, your book is really the kick in the pants I needed. My life was not so bad. I need to get up and start being grateful for my life and really moving forward instead of being so stuck. So, I love that, and it makes it all worth it. So I would love to have that continue, and have that outreach. I think for me personally, being able to connect with people either through podcasts, or I've done, some speaking, and whether it's book signings or whatever the case may be, and you and I are working with marketing companies to really try to figure out that right path. But obviously getting the book out there to people who maybe it can help. I've had friends say, "Wow, there's so much more to your life that's not in that book," and I said, "Well, my ghostwriter thought it was too long, and my publisher thought it was too long, and the editors thought it was too long, so we had to cut it off at some point." So, perhaps more books. There's definitely more stories to tell. I've had a whole career that's got lots of stories in it, but I've also had a lot of other personal growth that I could share, and then just a lot of other very bizarre, very crazy situations that have occurred to me that aren't in that book. So perhaps more books, but really just continuing to connect with people and hopefully helping people through what I've been through.
Yeah, I love that. And, it really does come down to, and we were talking about this right before the recording, it's like one reader at a time, one book at a time, one podcast at a time, one stage presentation at a time. And it's like, having that connection where people are, even after your first talk here in Naples, coming up to you afterwards and standing in line and waiting to talk to you. It's just like that. Wait a second. Like I know that the message in this book is so powerful, and it just takes time to get that out and to get people, awakened to the power that they have within to heal and to not stay stuck. And I love that you said that third category of person that has sent you in emails or messages. It was like that prodding they needed to basically get out of the pity party and get their life back on track. And I think to me, that's like the biggest gift you can give anyone, right?
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
help
And
that encourage, it's like an encouragement to say, like, come on, like, come alongside me, let's do this.
absolutely. Yeah. And it really, it comes down to self-awareness and just really realizing, most people don't even realize that they are stuck in a negative place or a negative energy or a sort of a woe is me. They don't even realize it until you kind of take a step back and think, okay. And so those are my favorite when people reach out to me. I had a few friends also, but I've also had some, people that I don't know reach out to me, which is amazing. I love that. But I do want to say that working with O'Leary Publishing and working with you and your team has been incredible. You had 3 editors working on the book to get it to a place of publishing, and you were phenomenal in holding my hand through this first process for me, and so were all of your editors, and Heather's incredible. They're all incredible. So I want to thank you for all your help, and you continue to be a help. This is partnership, and so I really appreciate the friendship and the guidance.
I do too. And I love it. I love what I do. I love that I got to work with you, and even in the process of design, and Jessica, the editor, there's also Jessica, the book designer, and on the front cover, if you're listening to this on audio, not seeing this on video, there's a photo of her hand, and it's the only tattoo that Kendra has, so she says, but I believe you.
It's true. It's true.
And it says lucky. And so we were able to get a picture of her hand with her tattoo on the front cover, because that's really a meaningful, to me, it's like the meaningful connection, because then when I see you on stage and you hold your hand up and I see your book, and it's like, oh my God, that's real. That's you, that's not a stock image of a hand with a lucky tattoo. That's actually Kendra's hand.
Really, that's right.
I know, it's really her. So, I mean, it's really cool to be able to put those creative pieces together, and get all of those things that make you who you are, and make the book represent who you are. So I know there's going to be more to come. And, we may even do another podcast episode, because I know we didn't get too much into the content of the book, because I really want people to pick it up.
Yeah.
I really want you, if you're listening and you're like, I've gone through really hard times, or I went through a lot of childhood trauma, and, I don't know what to do with that piece of my life, or, work, I got myself into some really nasty work situations, or relationships that I thought would turn out well and didn't. And how do I heal beyond that? This book is for you. It absolutely has every piece of the puzzle, like every, from childhood to relationships to professional life to healing, to health crises, injuries. What else? What other categories?
A lot of mind blowing stories. I hear it's a lot of mind blowing stories. I've heard again and again. I mean, I hear it, at least every other day. Somebody tells me I couldn't put the book down. I read it in 2 days. I read it in 3 days. I never read books. I read it in a day. And I love to hear that. I love to hear that. When I was flying out to Naples, and I think when I turned the book over to you for publishing, I had said, I never want to read this book again, because it is just full of just so much trauma and tragedy, and just insanity. But I picked it up on the plane, and started reading it when I was flying out to Naples to see you and do my speaking engagement with you and the other authors. And I couldn't put it down. I hadn't read it in a while. And I was like, this is really engaging.
This is really good.
Right. So I've read.
Did I write that? Yeah. I love that.
Did I really go through that?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Wow. Well, thank you for being on with me today on the podcast. This has been so fun. You are a joy. I really adore you. And I will again suggest that you all pick up a copy of I Can't Believe I'm Not Dead by Kendra Petty. You can get it anywhere that you normally purchase your books. I'm not going to tell you where you should, because I don't know, Amazon's logged on my phone. That's the problem. It's so simple to just,
right,
click deliver. I mean, if you can get the hardcover, you can get the paperback, you can get the ebook, and you could have it like tomorrow in a day.
Yeah, you can order it
So-
from my website also, kendrapettyofficial.com, which you helped me put
Thank
together.
you. Thank you for
Kendra Petty Official.
reminding me.
Yeah.
KendraPettyOfficial.com. You can get a preview of the book, so you can get a small sample, or you can order it direct on Kendra's site. Are you still signing copies?
I am. I have a couple of boxes of books
Okay.
here.
I didn't want to
so-
mention it because I didn't know if you had any more left for signed copies.
Yeah.
So there's a few signed copies left if you would like to get a signed copy. It is so fun to get a signed author copy. I think there's nothing like it, especially to gift it to somebody. Is so cool, So anyways, well, thank you so much for being
Thank
part of the
you,
show.
April. I'm so
And,
grateful for the time. Thank
And be
you.
sure to check the show notes for all the links we mentioned in the podcast. Have a great day, everyone. And thank you, Kendra.
Thanks, April. Thank you, everyone.
So this has been another episode of the iBook podcast. I'm April O'Leary signing off. Be sure to hop on over to o'learypublishing.com to start your author adventure and see what writing a book could do for you in your profession, in your career, and what doors it might open. We thank our guests for being a part of the show today, and be sure to subscribe to podcasts here on YouTube. We look forward to serving you and helping you get your book out into the world.